Well, hey, Morgan, thank you so much for doing this video with me and doing this sit down. And I look forward to talking with you here. Just to introduce you to everybody, this is Morgan Anderson, and she is the founder and CEO of Golden Lion Tax Solutions. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Absolutely. And we're gonna do just kind of the normal format of what we normally do, just kind of sit down and talk about a few things. And I'm always very intrigued by what you have to say. I love your style. I love the way you approach advocating for clients. I think we have very similar outlooks and all that. But I think you have a really cool niche in that you do something that's extremely important, and at the same time, you've had the discipline to be able to really kind of stick with that, what I call the hedgehog concept, which is not my concept, but it's a concept I like to borrow from a guy named Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great. And the hedgehog concept basically says you focus on what you're super good at and you become an expert in that area. And I applaud your discipline and your dedication to what you do in your area, because I know you're very smart, you do a lot of different things, but I know you really focus on advocating and helping your clients in a certain area, and quite frankly, a very delicate area, in
Yeah.
an area that can really, not just like we have delusions of grandeur, but I mean, a very life-changing type service that you do for people to really make their lives better. So, first, maybe give me a little bit more of your spiel on Golden Lion, and I'd also like to know how you chose that name, and give us a little background on that, because I always think that's fun to hear those stories.
Sure.
But yeah,
Sure.
tell me a little bit about it and kind of tell me like what you guys are awesome at.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks so much. Great
Yeah.
lead in. So we represent individuals and businesses when they have a tax debt issue with the IRS or the state. We've handled clients who have a $10,000 bill and several years of missing 1040s, all the way up to the largest case of my career. My 23 years in doing this was a family conglomeration that had 80 different LLCs, and between them, they owed over 30 million in past due payroll taxes, everything in between. We do simple installment agreements and penalty abatements, but then we deal with appeals of tax liens, levy actions, offers in compromise. Yes, they do exist. And yes, you can get them approved if you know what you're doing. But we've handled shutting down companies with tax debts and dealing with assets and personal assessments. We've helped form new companies. When partners had prior tax debts and you want to make sure there's that arm's length between the old company and the new company. We've handled tax audits, piggybacking with CPAs and accountants who actually did the returns. Innocent and injured spouses, that's a really big service that we provide as well. It can cause a lot of strife between a husband and wife. And, we're always very sensitive to the emotional journey of dealing with a tax debt. And not to sound too woo-woo or too sensitive, but a lot of our clients come to us with what we call ostrich syndrome. They've buried their head in the sand for a long time, because if they don't look at the notices coming in, if they don't read them, if they don't engage, it's easy for them to focus on other more happy, more positive things. Meanwhile, this debt is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger in the background, and they're getting buried with it, right?
Yeah.
When they come to us, it's okay, I know I have a problem. I know you're an expert in handling it. I'm going to put my hand in your hand, and I'm just going to trust that you're going to guide me to get to the end result.
Right.
That being a solution to the problem. And there are a lot of companies out there, they call them OIC mills, offer and compromise mills. Everybody's an offer. We'll sell you one for $5,000, and what they don't
And they make
say,
all kinds of crazy promises. Oh
yeah. And you see the ads on, you see the ads on TV. Oh, I owed $100,000 and I paid this company and they settled it for $5,000. The problem is they're not telling you what that client's situation had to be to qualify, first of all.
Yep.
Right. And then the amount of time it takes to go from the start to the finish of an offer and compromise, sometimes that's not always in the client's best interest because it tolls the collection statutes.
Completely.
I mean,
Yep.
there are so many factors to take into consideration when you're looking at a client's tax account and identifying the best solution. There are so many factors that come into it. And we kind of look at it like a Rubik's Cube.
Yep.
Right? You
Oh, yeah.
start with it and you say, okay, is it individual or business? Is it a married couple? Are there multiple partners? You know, how far behind are they in AR receivables if it's a business? You know, how long does the IRS have to collect on each liability that's owed? Because each liability has its own ticking clock. Same with the states. Some states have no collection statute and they can just collect on the debt and keep filing new liens, like California's one that's just
Everybody has a little bit different rules, right? I mean,
yeah. So we are experts. I've been in the industry for over 23 years now. I started in September of 99, happened upon it as a happy accident and found that every client situation is different and unique. You have kind of the same map that you follow, but boy, every step of that map can have 50 different choose your own adventure choices to make.
Yep.
And it's so interesting. It keeps you engaged constantly. And, you know, the changes in tax code, state and IRS, staying on top of all that. It's a remarkable career to have found myself in and found myself inspired by every day.
Yeah, it's such a moving target sometimes, right? Because it's like you said, I think Rubik's Cube is a great analogy. I've even used sort of the Jenga thing sometimes because it's, you know, it might look like it's okay to pull that piece out, but if you do the wrong piece and you don't know how it's going to affect the rest of the tower, the whole thing can come down, right? So it's like you have to be, and that's why, you know, in this area, that's why I applaud, I think, your approach to it, to really focusing on it, really being the expert. It's so important because there's so many moving parts of this thing and the stakes are so high that you got to be on top of your game. And I like what you said about, you know, really kind of assessing the issue at first. Cause you know that I'm, you know, where I come from is more of sort of the office of the CFO. That's really more where my profession lies and my strengths lie. And I said the same thing. I was talking with somebody else in a similar kind of sit down like this, and they were asking me kind of like, what's the first thing you do, right? And I'm like, well, first thing you need to do is get real, right? Like, let's no judgment. Maybe there's an ostrich and, you know, syndrome going on here, but like we got to get, if you really want to get to real solutions, like we got to get real. Like let's check our egos at the door, no judgment. Let's talk about where are we? What's the situation, no matter how bad it is. We have to start there, because if we don't start there, we can't fix the root of the problem, right? And so once we figure that out, then at least we can see what the board looks like, the board, you know, and say, okay, now we know what to do. It's a lot of the reasons too, I think, where, you know, attorneys will say, if you don't tell me the whole truth, I can't really help you. Like I have to know everything, even if it's bad, right? Tell me everything. I'm not going to judge you. You're not going to score any points by telling me something that isn't true or making yourself you know, in a better light or something. Tell me the truth. And just really got to start. So I totally align with you on that. And I do like what you were saying. We were talking the other day and you were talking about how important it was to really get to the root cause of the problem, right? Because we don't, and I'm like the same way too, is that, you know, if my goal is to have a repeat customer or somebody that's a customer for life, I'm not really doing my job, right? I mean, it's, you come to me to solve a problem, I want to solve it. If I'm your doctor, I want to diagnose and I want to treat and I want you to get better and not need me anymore, right? So what, I mean, we hadn't really gone into it, but what is it that you do to kind of maybe get to the root of the problem, or what have you kind of seen are best practices? And yeah, how do you do that with a client? Because I would think that's got to be pretty tricky sometimes to kind of find, because you don't know, you know, it's hard. And even if you have all the facts, right? Like it's still hard to really diagnose the root of something, right? But it's so important to do that.
It is. It is. You know, part of it is experience. Over the decades, I've seen financial statements for thousands of individual and business clients. So pulling on that experience, number one, but number two, sitting down and saying to the client, much like you do, hey, I need to know everything. Think of me as your priest, your probation officer, however you want to view us. If you can tell us everything and divulge everything that may even have some sort of impact on where you are today,
Right.
it's going to put us 5 steps ahead. Now, that being the case, a lot of clients, like you said, sometimes it's that they don't want to admit that it's their situation, right? They'll say, oh, I had clients years ago that would say, well, I only owe $20,000 or $30,000, and you call the IRS and it's actually 200 or 300,000. And then you talk to the client and they say, I just didn't want to tell you it's as bad as it is, right? Well, as much like you, this is a judgment-free zone. If I'm going to help you, I need to know everything. So we have that conversation.
You're not the first person to have this problem. It's like
Yeah, no,
you're not quite as unique as you might think you are. Nobody talks about this stuff, so you don't really know how. But there's a lot of people with a lot of tax problems, right?
Well, and I love when they say to me, I'm going to tell you something that's going to shock you. And I'm like, you know, after all this time, nothing shocks me. Yeah. And again, judgment-free zone, right? Let's have a 0% conversation where we can be absolutely blunt with each other. Yep. And it is going to be me probing you about what you're telling me, right? Best thing to do, first of all, is have a conversation with a client. Sit down and say, okay, tell me what your situation is and how you think it started. Mm-hmm. And based on that concentrated conversation, it could take an hour. We'll dedicate an hour, 2 hours, whatever it takes to speaking with the client, because every time they give us a little bit of information, we're going to pull on that string more. Okay, so wait a minute, you said this. Now tell me a little bit more about that. Because by doing that, we're able to probe deeper than a lot of clients will offer in the beginning. Yep. And it sets a comfort level. You know, oh, you won't believe this. I feel kind of bad. And we're like, no, just tell us. And they become more comfortable and relaxed. You start a relationship. And by starting it with that non-judgmental conversation, it creates this comfort zone for them. And they'll start feeding you more information. But a lot of ours comes from, okay, talking to the client first, and then speaking with the taxing authority and saying, okay, I need to know all the details of this tax account. And then looking at tax returns, bank statements, making an assessment on and monthly bills, how the company is spending their cash. And it's pieces of a picture puzzle, right? And you start getting all the pieces in place and seeing how things connect. And just over the experience that we've created throughout our careers, we see little flags that pop up and we'll start pulling on those strings. But it's important to get down to the root of those issues by pulling all these pieces together, because then we can start diagnosing the problem and drilling in and help fix it. A lot of our work is done in a collaborative way with the client. If it's a business, their office manager or their CFO or internal accountant, whomever they're using, and external sources, any external bookkeepers, CPAs. We kind of look at it as a team effort, right? This problem didn't come to be because of one person. It came to be because of a whole team of issues. Right. And a lot of times when I talk to a client CPA or an accountant, they say, I have been telling them they've got to make estimated tax payments this whole year and they're not listening. And then, the client's saying, okay, well, I didn't have the ability. I heard my accountant say it, but now I have this other source coming in and confirming that as part of the problem, right? So let's all work together on figuring out how we can stop this bleeding, how we can get in front of it, how we can make positive adjustments to prevent this problem from continuing to grow.